In, I'll just do a quick hello and welcome. So good afternoon. Thank you all for joining us as the first in our second series of In Conversation With. I'm Lottie, if you don't know me, founder of the Jurist Society platform and private client consultancy focused on crafting a deeper connection between wealth and wellness. So I'm delighted to be here with Nichole Farrow. She is a divorce coach and blended family expert, and today we're going to be discussing family finances through divorce. We're going to be sharing our experiences and insights. Hopefully you'll have some questions you can throw our way as well. And we're going to do a little bit of a role reversal. So Nicole's going to actually be picking my brain, which might take a bit of picking to do. But yeah, so there we go. I don't know, Nicole, if you want to give a little bit more of an intro on what you do and how you help your clients before we get started.
Yeah, can do. So I'm a divorce and family coach. So I specifically work with divorcing parents to really help them through the divorce process, and then also to blend their family afterwards. So anyone who's getting divorced knows if you've got kids, then the relationship doesn't end there. You still have to have a relationship with that person, and it's not till the kids leave school. It is the rest of your life. So it's in everybody's best interest, and especially that of your children, to try and make that work in the best way possible. And I realise that going through divorce, it's really tricky. I've been there myself, and emotions are flying everywhere. So I support people throughout that process, and then afterwards as well. So I also work with blended families, so families who are coming together but have children from previous relationships or marriages, and trying to make that work and gel together as well.
Yeah, so I mean, it's no easy mission that you've got, but it's such a valuable service that you have, because going through such an emotional sort of untangling between two families can be really difficult to know what's what, and people just have very different ideas on parenting techniques as well, as we've discussed before. So what one person wants, the other person might want one, and compromise can be really tricky.
Yeah, and that's true of relationships that stay together. You both have differing perspectives and opinions, because you've got you're drawing on your own experience, your own childhood, your own expectations. So then when you throw in divorce and separating the romantic part of your relationship, but still trying to find common ground on your co-parenting relationship, and then once you've figured that out, introducing new people into that dynamic as well, and their influence, it can be a bit of a emotional melting pot. So that's why I do what I do. I love what I do. I come from a blended family myself. I've been divorced. I know it inside out and back to front. So it's an absolute pleasure to help families through it.
Yeah, really, really, really important. And then again, what we're talking about this afternoon is throwing finances into the mix, which are emotionally loaded at the best of times. But when you've got this additional layer of complexity, you've got children and their well-being to look after as well. This is where it gets really, really tricky.
It does, yeah. So it's hard, I think, at that point in the divorce proceedings where you have to sort of financially sever your finances with your partner, ex-partner anyway, and that's always a difficult conversation to be had. And it's the thing, it's the kids and the finances, they're the things that really throw up a lot of issues throughout the divorce process, and they're so emotive. But there is kind of a start and an end point. At some point you're going to have a settlement. It may take quite a time to get there, but eventually you will get to a settlement. How much that costs you along the road will depend on whether how amicable or amenable you can be with your ex-partner, but you will ultimately sever ties financially. But what you don't sever ties in is financially supporting your children and what that looks like going forward. So again, there is still a connection there that you have to try and manage together, in the sense of, whether it's schooling or fees or holidays or pocket money or where any of that is coming from. And there's decisions that have to be made. And as the children grow and go through different stages in their life, their needs change. And, financially, the requirements change as well. And then, as we were discussing the other day, which I know we're going to touch on today as well, is then when you introduce new people into your family, and then you're trying to potentially merge finances with a new partner who may also have their own dependents that they need to be financially responsible for, and potentially going to go on and have your own with that new partner, and then how you kind of manage all of that. So it's still, even though your settlement might be agreed, and how you feel about that what may vary. I mean, generally the courts will always make it that there is never a winner and a loser. They don't do that, so they will try and make it a fair settlement. But there is an ongoing responsibility that you both then have, naturally, by the fact that you have a family together, and that can get more complicated the more blended it becomes, which is why I think it's so important to get the right advice and support, and why I wanted to talk to you and pick your brains, as you said, and do a bit of a role reversal on how do you kind of go into that process of trying to deal with your finances, getting ready for divorce, but then through it, and then afterwards as well. So how do people get to that point where they can really kind of support themselves, and what do they need to know in order to be able to navigate that successfully?
Yeah, and I think that's exactly it. It's the how. It's the what am I doing and how am I going to do it? And I think that once people come out of such an emotionally loaded experience such as divorce, it can be really tricky for them to see any positives at the end of the tunnel. So when you're going, and again, we're talking about different scenarios here. So if you've got children and you're divorcing, that's going to be quite a different setup, because you're going to have a parenting plan in place during that whole process as well. So ideally what would happen as part of the settlement is that you would already have designated and agreed who is taking care of what. Now, it's all well and good having that in principle, but as we know, as soon as you leave the courtroom or you've got your settlement, your decree absolute has been issued, things change. So it's getting people to stay on track and with those agreements as well. And what I think that it's really makes so much importance for families to do is to really document and say who is contributing to what, to when, how much, and how long for. You know, if you're, say, the mother and you're taking the maintenance of the children, you're looking after the children for a certain amount of time, there will be that expectation that you will still have to share the cost of those children up until age 18 or university. And sometimes it can be really difficult to then get that money out of the other party if they've lost interest, for instance, which does happen, and I'm sure you've seen that. So it's almost getting that pot of money allocated right at the outset and having a written agreement in place for anybody who wants to actually access that capital. Or what some parents do, if you've got schooling, is actually negotiate with the schools and pay up front, and you can get a discount that way as well. And then you know at least that the children are provided for, and you don't get into arguments later down the line when something else comes up. The agreement verges onto different priorities, and suddenly that pot of money that you allocated has been used up by something else, and the children are then, suffering because the parents can't agree. And so I think having at the outset communication right from the start, what are your expectations, and document that is crucial. But then also sort of putting barriers in place that you can't then veer from what you've agreed, just in case another partner comes along, for instance. They then don't agree that you want to send the child to private school. They might not like that. They might not agree that. They might have other expectations for what that pot of money might do. And I think that that's, again, where somebody like you, Nicole, comes in, where these conversations for third parties as part of the parenting unit can influence what the intention is as well. And I don't know if you've seen that.
Yeah, absolutely. And actually, you're right in the sense of the parenting plan is so key in setting out what that framework is around the communication. And I think people assume that a parenting plan is just for the kind of management of the children and raising the children. They forget the fact that you can actually include finances into that, and it's what you're signing up for and agreeing to. And of course, the parenting plan evolves and changes, as I said, as the children grow and their needs change, and you can't, agree everything. But if you've got a really good foundation and a really good framework, and you've considered things like what's going to come down the line. So if it is, university, or, as you say, private schools, or what happens when we meet someone new, what happens if one of us decides to have more children, that it doesn't then kind of impact the children that you already have, that you have this agreement and you do it at a time when you're not actually dealing with that scenario. So you don't talk about how to introduce a new partner to your children, or what that's going to look like when you start sharing finances with that new partner at the time when you're doing it. You do it at a time when it's not actually on the table, and you can come at it much more rationally and think about the scenario objectively, because you're not in it feeling all the emotions and everything else that it's sort of churning up for you at that time. And that's the best time to do the kind of parenting plan, is when you're at the most calm state. And 9 times out of 10, you'll find that fundamentally the big things, or at least there are some similarities in the way that the two parents want to parent their children, and you know, there are some common ground, and then there's obviously going to be some disparity and some, you know, compromise and things that you're going to have to agree, which you're able to do when you're not in that emotional state of, you know, when we're now having to face this situation that is, you know, bringing up lots of things for us that we're trying to emotionally deal with. Because the other thing as well with divorce is you never get two people who are, very rarely, can't say never, very rarely do you get two people who are at exactly the same stage at any one time. So 9 times out of 10 there is someone who has chosen to leave the marriage and is further along. They're kind of emotionally dealing with the breakdown of the marriage, and they're at a different stage to what the other person is. So you've got to take that into account as well, that you're not, you know, you're in fruit, but you're not comparing apples and apples and approaching it in exactly the same way. So by doing the parenting plan, that allows for that. And similarly, after the divorce as well, you know, one parent might choose to move on with someone quite quickly, and someone else might take a bit longer. You just don't know. It's very individual. So
Yeah,
the
and
parenting plan allows for that
as well is also like touching on, like, you know, the different parents' capabilities. Is one might go off and then start earning again, and so then you might have to take into consideration childcare costs, or, you know, other bits that haven't, you know, weren't anticipated, or maybe their new partner has actually got a lot more you know, assets, or, you know, income behind them, so they can then afford to treat the child more. And I think that this comes to a really nice point about being fair, and being fair to the children. And then, as we touched on before, is having the blended family coming in from the other side, where maybe you're joining into another family, and your expectations and your you know, your way that you want the children to be treated is going to be very different to how that parent and that other parent is also thinking about what their priorities are. Because it's yeah, as we said, finances are so personal and they're so emotionally loaded, and I think that's why you have to remove yourself from this panic, you know, reacting state, and have things lined up. And again, what you can do to sort of safeguard finances, if you think that there's going to be a risk later down the line for somebody accessing capital that they don't want, is you put a trust together for the children. You wrap it up, so then you can have, you know, maybe the godparents as trustees, the children are the beneficiaries. You have these structures in place so that a third party who's joining the marriage potentially can't then have a say on it, because I think that can be a big risk for somebody who you know, has intended for the money to go in a certain place, but then they don't. Another thing you could do for children is actually start putting money aside into a pension for them. You know, you can put up, you know, just under £3,000 each year. You can contribute that into a child's pension, and that will then help them set up for longer term. Again, you could use a JISA, use their JISA allowances, and then create a separate school pot for them each year in a tax efficient way that you can then draw the money out separately. You know, not even school fees, like holiday, just general maintenance of children. As you know, they're pretty expensive to run. You know. But, you know, and it's having all of that outset. And, you know, I had one client, and what she's doing is they have a separate pot for the children, which is just in a cash pot, but both parents have to agree in writing and give notice if there's any significant withdrawals that they want to make for the children. So say it's for holidays, or they need some more sports kit or something like that. They have to let the other parent know and sign off on it, so that they're not also duplicating. So that's another thing that can happen, is you're buying the cricket kit and she's buying the cricket kit, and now they've got 3 cricket kits, and, you know, and it's that crossover of knowing who's buying what and where it's going to be, which house is it going to be at, and there's a lot of administrative chaos that needs organizing.
There is, yeah. And actually what you touched on a minute ago about the fairness is also when you're then having, if you're looking to have more children, or potentially, you know, inherited stepchildren, is the fairness that is not just perceived by your ex-partner or your new partner, which can in itself cause, you know, can cause issues, but it's also amongst the children themselves. So there does need to be an element of agreement, you know, in the sense of how you're going to treat the children, and that includes financially as well. And to make sure that that is fair across the board as much as possible, because, you know, they're not silly, they will pick up on it. And, you know, all of these experiences that they have around money and the availability of money and how it's discussed around them will then start to shape their beliefs around money and how they will then fare in the future. And, you know, as it's kind of a bit of a British thing. I think we don't like discussing money. It's very, it's a bit of a taboo subject, and we don't discuss it openly. And actually, by doing that, it kind of creates this little bit of awkwardness and uncomfortableness that, children then can pick up on. And actually, that's the same for anyone who's going into a new relationship with somebody is, we all talk about everything but finances. Yeah. And then when you then start to, get serious with someone, you've got to start to share finances. If you've then got responsibilities elsewhere, you need to be really upfront about that and know where you stand in order to kind of ensure that you don't have any of that comparisons or, that something that could have been resolved by discussing it up front doesn't then fester and become a much bigger issue because you just didn't discuss it. And I said, I know it's kind of almost a British thing. We don't like to talk about money, but actually we really need to, especially if, you're going into a new relationship, you do have dependents that you are responsible for from a previous relationship, and you're trying to blend your family ultimately. So you need to have an element of transparency and fairness in order to make that really work, because as I said, kids know, and they will feel it. And whatever your relationship with money is and however you speak about money, trust me, they're sponges, they're picking it up all the time, and it's shaping how they're going to deal with it in the future and how they're going to handle money with their own partners and their own children. And this stuff just sets in. So it's really important to be aware and have those uncomfortable conversations and be aware of what you're saying around your kids as well.
Yeah, and I think that that's also something that we should bring in at this point is if you're not comfortable in having these conversations, then find some way or someone who can help you to mediate and to help you guide you through the difficult conversations, because sometimes we don't know what questions to ask, or we're scared of what the responses might be. And I think, especially if you've gone through sort of hard negotiations on very finite, settlements, it's now quite open-ended, and it's like, what might we like this to look like? What's best case? What's worst case scenario? And sitting down with somebody who's a professional who can help you to do a cash plan, cash flow plan, who can help you to set up some kind of parenting plan as well in terms of the finances around the children, can help you to avoid this emotional response and put some practical guidance around it as well, because it can be really difficult to ask for help. And that's where working with a divorce coach, there's websites, there's apps, there's a lot of tools out there, and we can share them later as well for resources for people to use to help to just break the ice as well for what their expectations should be. And although you would have gone through and done your budgeting and everything like that during the divorce, but as we said, it's fluid when you've got a new partner coming in as well. It's before you've signed that new marriage document or whatever, or before they move in. Make those decisions then when tensions are not high, when you can actually clearly see what you would like it to look like, and then you kind of just have this happy medium of what good looks like, and then you can identify when things veer off. And I think as well, going back to structuring, if you've got kids who are in school, using the school calendar to diarize dates can help you. So I always say to clients, imagine you're a CEO of your own business, CFO of your own business, the business of you need to organize into quarterly segments so that you can then budget and account for any major outlays that you've got. The beginning of the school terms, what you're going to need. You're going to need new kit. You need to predict school holidays, new pencil cases, all of these kind of things as well. If you then budget that in and have that all aligned at the beginning of the year, these are what the big chunks are. Put those chunks of money into a separate account that both you and your co-parent can then access, and you have that agreed, and that's all set aside, so you don't end up arguing and squabbling over who's going to pay to go to the Christmas party or whatever it is, because that's not fair on the children, and they don't want to become part of this this money mess when they just want to enjoy their childhood a lot of the time.
Yeah, and it does. The thing is with finances, it does in a relationship that's together, it can cause a lot of tension. Certainly in a relationship that has broken down, that's then gone to co-parenting, it causes even more. I mean, certainly I'm a child of divorce, and that was the thing I always remember my parents arguing about growing up. they actually stopped arguing and started getting on like a house on fire when I left school, and there was no more financial kind of obligation from either of them. They got on like a house on fire, but up until that point it was still a, you know, a source of contention, and it was whose turn was it to buy my school shoes, or, you know, pay for the next school trip, or whatever it was. And actually, as you say, having that all planned out and having a pot you can draw down from, an agreement in place, and said this is where, you know, having a parenting plan that you know, that includes the financial side of things as well, is really key. And I think sometimes people are so put off by how long it's taken them to get to that financial settlement within their divorce, and they're so emotionally drained. The idea of having yet another conversation about finances that doesn't have an end date, or it does, but, you know, it's a long way off because the kids are still very small, that can just feel like too much emotionally to deal with at that time. But that's where, you know, you're quite right, Lottie, that's the time when you really need to get some support and some help to kind of break it down and just have these conversations at the time when you are less emotional and defensive and can make really good decisions that are going to affect you but also your children. And also, to come on to the point that you were just making about your financial situation changing, I think we always make the assumption that, you know, if mum is the primary carer, for example, and she's not working, you know, it's X, and if dad is, it's Y. But finances change, as you say, with meeting a new person, or it might be that, you know, one changes her career or decides to go back to work. You know, it is fluid, it isn't set in stone, and, you know, all of these plans need to be have an element of flex in them. But I think it's about having the framework in place, and that's both in the sense of the plans that you put in place, but also that building that communication between one another that enables you to then deal with the next thing as your lives change and evolve and you grow and your children grow and your needs change as a family, and whether that is, as I said, returning to work, or the children getting older, or introducing a new partner, whatever it is that's going to come up, you can have those a bit of a, you know, look forward to what they might be, where you might trip up, but then also enable a bit of flex, but have the communication in place that when those things do come up, that you know how to handle them together. That really stands you in good stead. And
I think that's quite. So I was reading something earlier. Actually, I'm always reading random things, but having that idea of the children growing up, and then you're gifting them money, and I think that's a really interesting conversation for adult children going through divorce as well, and whether or not, you know, you give them a deposit for a property, or, you know, you start you know, giving them an early inheritance, for instance, and do you do that fairly between them if it's your stepchild or if it's not, and those again become quite complex. And again, then if that child divorces, who does that go to? So, you know, it's keeping that paper trail is crucial. The paper trail and attention, you know, lawyers love that. That's what you need to have a solid case, because, you know, otherwise it can really get very murky, and you can end up getting some really bitter disputes and racking up a load of legal costs that can sometimes outweigh what the initial gift was and what the initial intention was. So I think that it's bearing in mind that, you know, children are not always minors. You get big children as well.
That's true. That's very true. And also, it's interesting what you said about, you know, stepchildren and what you kind of gift them, etc. And that comes back to that point of fairness. At the end of the day, if you're, you know, you are a family and you're looking to grow your family, and if you've met someone new and they have children and you're looking to be part of their lives, you know, there is an element of having some kind of rational fairness and being open about your relationships and transparency, so that people do feel included and do feel part of the family if that's the way you're going. And it's about trying to be really mindful of your actions and what you're doing, so that you don't end up alienating any of your children, because when you become blended, the idea is that they are, you know, you take on that responsibility as a, you know, as a parent to them as well. It's not that you're replacing the other parent, but you have a level of duty of care by the fact that you're growing your family, and that needs to be taken into account of, you know, people's feelings around that, and you know, how that's perceived and felt within the family and the family dynamic, because one you know, relationship with one has a massive ripple effect to everybody else, because families are a culture in themselves, and, you know, culture is ultimately, you know, group behavior, group habit, and you want to have healthy habits and healthy relationships, because that's what enables your children, and I'm talking all children within a blended family, to go on and have healthy relationships themselves, and you're responsible for that. And I know that sounds probably terrifying, and I'm a parent myself, and I often think, God, if we knew like the impact that we have on our children, I don't think any of us would have them, to be honest,
No,
because it's
well,
such a momentous responsibility. But it's true. They learn from us. They learn from what they grew up around. We are products of our own environment, so you owe it to to your children, and that's all children in a blended family, to show up and do your part and to be as fair as possible, because you're shaping them.
Yeah. Oh, so many. I mean, Nicole and I could talk for hours and hours and hours, because I think we have such a shared view and shared values with like how we think things should be and like how we wish the world worked. But yeah, unfortunately, we can't fix it all yet. But I think it's probably worth wrapping up a little bit now, because I'm conscious of time. So shall I just do our top 5 takeaways? We did that.
Yes. Yeah. Go for it.
So Nicole and I came up with what are 5 things that we think that would really help anybody who's going through a situation where they need to have clarity on their finances with their family. So the number 1 is organisation, documentation of who pays what, when, how much. Have that in writing, both agree on that. The second one, communication, how to talk about the finances effectively, coming to an agreement. It's not having one person shun it and go, nod, grunt, and then walk away. It's you need an agreement, you need a compromise, and you need both parties to eventually nod. Whether or not they need to be on the same page. The third one is structurizing. So that goes back to my point of diarising, key dates, looking ahead, no nasty surprises, have that emergency fund for your kids. Fourth one, timing. When are you going to discuss this? Try and do things sooner rather than later. It's really difficult to unpick things when you're clouded with emotional turmoil. And the fifth one, outsource, get support where needed. You can't do everything on your own. We're not islands. We are human beings. We like to interact. We need external help. Look at what services are available, whether it's apps, solicitors, coaches like Nicole, financial specialists, websites, and get in touch with either of us as well if there's anything that you're feeling a bit stuck on, and we can point you in the right direction. I don't know if there's anything you wanted to add to that.
No, I think you've got it. I think absolutely. They are the key takeaways. Definitely.
Oh. Well, brilliant. Thank you so much. I really, really enjoyed this. I think we've got lots to go away and think about. I'll do a little write-up thingy at the bottom. And if anyone's got any questions, please get in touch.
Thank you very much. Lovely to talk to you, as always.
See you. Thank you very much. Lovely afternoon.
Bye.
Bye.